The question is, do the candidates believe that the measures that have been taken to address concerns about MPs' expenses will restore the confidence of the public in those we elect on Thursday? Or would the candidates like to see further steps taken to ensure better things in the future? Ruth?
Well, this expenses thing, I personally think that it's been proven that you have taken expenses when you shouldn't be taking expenses, and I personally don't think you should be standing in this election. And I think that whatever party, because I think there's more than one party that's had this problem, I think each party should have dealt with it before it got to the election.
Thank you.
Well, I have to say that I found that this was something that went on and on and on. There clearly were some really major abuses of the system. James will no doubt be able to explain how the system grew up. So there were some really serious abuses of the system, and there were some occasions where people were vilified for some actually, I suppose you could say, with hindsight, were acts of folly. And the press actually vilified people in equal measure, depending on whether they'd been verging on the fraudulent or whether they'd just stuck a bunch of receipts in. They'd spent the money, they were allowed to claim for it, so they did. So there has been a change. I have to think that the pendulum seems to have swung a bit far. Like, who decides that £1,500 is too much to spend on gardening when you move into a new house, which has been, where the garden's been let to go back in ruin? Who decides that 1,000 is the most you can claim? If you claim 1,500, sorry, you'll have to pay the balance back. That to me was silly, and it was an open, honest system where everyone can see what people are entitled to. It's common agreement as to what people are entitled to, and that everything that is claimed is put in the public domain. That will go a long way to help. But how many people here have ever claimed expenses as part of their job?
Not £100,000.
Do you employ any staff? Who said not £100,000?
Yes.
Do you employ any staff? Do you pay them?
How can you even attempt to justify? How can you even attempt to justify?
Justify what?
The expenses that have been claimed that everybody within their right mind can actually think and say, I can't claim this. Yes, I have claimed expenses when I travel from A to B on business, but I've never ever claimed a garden when I had to move in for a couple of months in a house that wasn't mine. Sorry. Then I maintain
so you'd be quite happy to have your everything, all of your receipts nailed up on a wall outside your house, would you? Yes. Right, okay, well that's pleasant, and that's what is going to happen to MPs as a result of this.
Let's move on.
Don't try to cut my grass.
Right. Back in December, I did call for James Arbuthnot's resignation on this issue. I think the Daily Telegraph did a great service to the country by printing all of that information about the expenses, because once and for all, we could actually expose what was going on in Parliament. It is removed. The first step has been taken, determining what MPs have to pay back and already making certain changes. So, for example, there is now, of course, no second-hand allowance for North East Hampshire MPs. And what needs to go further as well is we need to have an independent body looking at the way MPs are paid, staffing, what is the job criteria, all those sort of things need to be looked at. I've been to Parliament a few times to go for various meetings where there's various groups that want to speak to potential candidates. And what did concern me is that as you're standing in a reception or so on, you have people dressed up in bow ties and serving you. It's almost like a master-servant relationship. It doesn't seem to be a place of equals. It seems to be removed. Some of the traditions are removed from daily society. And we need to look at all those expenses and all those trappings, because it almost makes you feel, when you're there, as if you're more important than you are, which is why a lot of MPs could not understand the backlash that came out in public because of that removal. And that is what we need to look at as well. It's the culture of the place, making it part of the 21st century, not keeping it with these old traditions going back centuries that don't seem to have a place anymore. Getting rid of unelected governing body. We should have an elected House of Lords, like we have elected senators in other parts of the world. So this was just the first step of expenses. There's much more that needs to happen. And unfortunately, well, fortunately, what we're saying, of course, is that is why you need a balanced parliament, because electoral reform won't happen if one of the two old parties get back in.
Denzil was right on his 2-minute limit there. I'm delighted not to have tobacco glass yet. James.
Denzil says that MPs could not understand the backlash. I can assure you we could. It was obvious when the Daily Telegraph, and it did, Denzil was right, the Daily Telegraph did do a service to the country, and I have never complained about what the Daily Telegraph did, because it was a system that did need to be exposed. And when it was exposed, I think the entire country was furious with what parliamentarians had done, and with what, let's be quite straightforward, what I had done. And that was why I think I was the first member of Parliament to say this was wrong, I should pay it back. And I think by doing that, I started something. And I apologised, and I did pay it back immediately. But Barry Jones said that I could explain how it all grew up. It grew up because members of Parliament had their pay assessed by independent bodies. And when those independent assessments were put to the Prime Minister of the time, whether Conservative or Labour, the Prime Minister would always say, no, you can't have that. We'll ignore the independent assessment, but it's all right. We'll make it up with an over-generous system of expenses. Not a good way of doing things. I accept it as a bad way of doing things. But it turned out to become part of the package of payment. There are lots of different ways of making up packages of payment. In our case, we had one that was expressly designed, oddly enough, to cover gardening. Why? I don't know. But that was what happened. The question is, though, have the measures been taken which have been taken? Are they enough to restore the confidence of the public? And I think it's going to take years, possibly decades, to restore the confidence of the public. And it's going to take an enormous amount of work by people working as hard as they possibly can to be as open as we can. Denzil says we need an independent body to look at pay and expenses. Well, I'm pleased to say we've just set one up. We've got one. We need to be absolutely transparent about our expenses, about our salaries and everything. But we need to go further as well, and I could, if you were to allow it.